Hello and welcome back to Tell Me Your Ghost Story. I'm your host, Cassie Askin, and today we hear Alex McDonald's stories. Alex's main story is one of the darkest stories I've heard and featured on the show. I do have to issue a trigger warning that themes of domestic violence are discussed. Let's hear Alex's stories. Hey Alex, tell me your ghost story.
All right. So, hi, everybody. My name is Alex McDonald. I'm an Angelino. I've been here 21 years, originally from the East Coast, grew up in New Jersey. I work out here now as the film programmer at a place called the Philosophical Research Society. It's a nonprofit in Los Feliz, based out of an esoteric and occult center for spiritual searching. It's been here since the 1930s. But the story that I'm mostly going to talk about happened before I moved to Los Angeles, but did happen in LA. This took place in 2002, and it's my most horrific supernatural story, but I've had many. Growing up, I kind of shared a kinship with my grandmother in that she had a lot of kind of sightings and supernatural experiences. She had a real connection to beyond the veil, so to speak. She would speak to her dead grandparents, and after he passed away, her father, she would have conversations with him. And a lot of my early sightings are not things that I remember, but that I've been told about by my mother. When she saw the film The Sixth Sense, she said, "That's what you were like as a little kid," which I didn't realize it was to that extent. But one of the stories she told me was that at a very young age, she'd gotten me a tape recorder, and I went off into the corner with it with my stuffed dog. I had a stuffed dog. Nana, maybe, was her name. We'll go with that. And she said that I was like describing all of this like afterlife stuff in great detail to Nana, like, don't worry if you pass away, because you're going to see these shadowy men come for you, and there'll be a tunnel, and they're going to lead you down the tunnel. And, it's all the stuff that she had not spoken to me about whatsoever. And then another time she told me, my mother was like warning me not to play in the street. I grew up on a very busy street. And I said, "Don't worry about it. The little boy told me." And she said, "What little boy?" And I was like, "Oh, the little boy who got hit by a car in the street. He was telling me he was playing right there and he got hit, and he was warning me not to play by the street." And she had no idea. And then she talked to neighbors, and there was a boy who, like, right in front of our place got hit by a car. So things like that. Like, I had what I thought was an imaginary friend, but looking back, why would a child have this imaginary friend? It was like a middle-aged, probably later than middle-aged, probably in his early 60s, black man who, like, told me that he was the janitor at the high school down the street. And I was like, didn't think anything of him, like, coming by and saying hello. And he taught me some of my first curse words. First time I heard the word pussy was from this guy, and like repeated it. And she was like, "Where did you hear that?" And I was like, "Oh, Levon told me that." And she was like, "Who's Levon?" I was like, "Levon, my friend." And I described him, and she's like, "I've never ever seen this person with you." And I was like, "He was just in the backyard with me." And of course, it's concerning if there's an adult hanging around a little kid. So she's like trying to get to the bottom of this. And the best she could figure out was like, there's a high school down the street where this guy used to work. So at some point, so who knows? I haven't fact checked any of that. But that is to say, like, I had a lot of experiences. I grew up in a house that was sort of a hotbed of paranormal activity. It's from 1780. It was actually housed Washington's troops post Revolutionary War, while there were still like some skirmishes and things going on. Washington's headquarters are in Morristown, New Jersey. And I grew up in Madison, New Jersey, really nearby. And there weren't that many houses built in the area yet. So when there were a surplus of troops, they would sometimes stay in local homes. So evidently, Washington's troops, some of them stayed at our house. There's even some like documentation on it. It's called the Benjamin Bruin House in Madison, New Jersey. And it was part of the Underground Railroad. We found a secret door in the floor that was raised up where they would house runaway slaves. So it had a very rich history, and we had a ghost there that was potentially like a soldier from back then with like a tricorner hat, who my mother would see sometimes in the house and who I saw in my bedroom looking out the window as a child. Like I woke up and saw him and then somehow fell back asleep. And, which I've heard is something that people experience sometimes when they see ghosts in like this kind of liminal state. But yeah, a lot of strange occurrences growing up. One that's really funny was I have a father who's a bit neurotic, to say the least, and he had this kind of obsession with not slamming the microwave door, like pressing the button to close the microwave. And it was in this kind of like had the shelving in the kitchen, so it was mounted at like eye level, this microwave. And this was in my early teens. This is actually a good link to the main story because I was in a long distance relationship at the time, which we're going to hear more about. And I was on the phone with her, and this was like, I must have been like 15, 16. I was left. My parents went off somewhere to celebrate their anniversary. And this was one of the first times that I was left home alone for like 3 days or something like that. And I'm on the phone with this long distance girlfriend, and I'm nuking something in the microwave, and I walk away and I go back to close it. And this thing is mounted at like eye level. And I approach it, and the door to the microwave starts to close on its own. And right as it passes right in front of my face, the button on the microwave, there's this thing. He was obsessed. My dad was obsessed. Press the button and gently close the microwave. Right as this door passed my face, the button pressed in and the microwave gently clicked closed. And I was absolutely horrified in the moment, ran to the opposite end of the house. But in retrospect, it's hilarious that my dad's such a pain in the ass that this specter that was living with us was like, you know what, man? I got it. I know the drill. I know what to do. So that's a pretty benign, charming experience. But this one, the main one that I want to tell you about, happened when I went to visit this long distance girlfriend. So I met this woman. I say woman because I didn't get into. This was someone who had no right dating somebody as young as me at the time, in retrospect. She met me when she was 20 and I was 14. So not cool. Sorry to add something heavy otherwise to this, but I feel like it's bears mentioning considering the nature of the haunting. I did not meet her until I was 17, for whatever it's worth. Not that that's legal still, but we were just in a long-term flirtatious phone. This is the AOL AIM days, which is where we met. And we had similar interests at the time, I guess. But I met her at age 17. I came out. I was living in New Jersey. She was in LA. I made my way out here and visited her. And that would have been in, like February of 2002. And then later that summer, I came out and spent the summer with her. And that's when the story took place. So she was living in Alhambra initially when I first met her out here. And she was looking to move to a new apartment. And she's looking at a bunch of different places. And she ended up looking at this one place in the Pico Union area here in LA. It was this really rundown apartment building that had been abandoned for quite a while. And this Mexican family had taken it over. And it was a father, mother, and I believe 4 daughters, spanning from about 8 or 9 years old to like 23. But what they were doing was they were fixing it up and renting it as they went along. So they fixed up the bottom floor apartment facing the street, and they moved into that. It was like a 2-bedroom, I think. And then they fixed up the apartment above that on the second floor. And then they would keep renovating apartments as they went and renting them as they went, which I doubt is legal these days. My guess is you probably can't start renting out a building until it's in general been adequately renovated. But I think they were paying for the renovations by renting it as they went. So when my ex, we'll call her Kay, came to check the place out, she met with the eldest daughter, who was about her age, and the youngest daughter, who was like 8 or 9. Because the father didn't speak English, it was this eldest daughter who was showing new applicants to these different apartments. So she came in, and the youngest daughter was like, "Which apartment are you showing her?" And she said, "Oh, number. Gosh, you'd think with all of this, I'd remember the number of the apartment, but let's just say it's like number 24." I'm showing her number 24, and the little girl like froze up and said, "Don't go in that apartment. It's haunted." And the older sister's like, "Shut up, stupid. Like, don't listen to her, older sister thing, like, whatever." So she didn't really think much of it. And she went up to see the apartment, little studio apartment on the second floor. And it was the last apartment that had been renovated on that floor. And when I say that these apartments were, in disrepair, they were in disrepair. I'm talking like collapsing ceilings and, just shards of glass everywhere and bits of wood scattered around and just really in rough shape. But this was nicely renovated. The apartment across from it was a mess. The apartment next to it was a mess. Below it, empty, yet to be renovated. So there were 3 apartments left on the second floor that had not yet to be renovated. And I think there were, maybe 3 or 4 on the first floor that had yet to be renovated. So it was very eerie just to be in this last finished apartment on the floor and then have all these empty apartments in great disrepair next to and below you. Like, you could look down the hallway and it's just all completely empty. Anyhow, the price was right and the place was nice enough. She ended up moving in. Nothing, I think, to note at first. The one odd thing about the apartment, I don't know how much this plays into the story other than its location will become relevant, but in the bathroom, there was a window by the shower that opened up into what essentially looked like you were looking inside a chimney. It was a brick pit that you were looking down into and up. You could see the sky if you looked upward, but you were basically in this brick shaft that you were looking into with like broken glass and pieces of wood at the bottom of it. It was just a very odd thing to open a window to. And the bathroom plays prominently into the story. So she moved in, not a lot going on really, settling in. But then she started to hear a woman crying in the hallway at night. And there was a young couple that lived like 2 units over on the second floor. This young couple, and they would fight quite a bit. So Kay, being new, she basically just thought, "Oh, this poor woman, but I'm new here. I shouldn't get involved. I shouldn't meddle." So we heard it once, and she just, heart went out to her, but didn't do anything. And then she started having sleep paralysis for the first time in her life. She would wake up and be wide awake and feel like she could not move. She could barely breathe. She couldn't scream and felt like somebody was pressing down on her and saw a shadowy figure standing above her, figure of a man standing above her. She'd never ever experienced this before in her life. And that happened a few times, and she would tell me about it later. And she told me about this crying woman, and it happened again. She heard her crying. I think this time was the time where she thought, well, I should just go out and see if she's okay. So she's hearing this crying woman in the hallway, and she goes to the door. It's late at night. It's probably, 1 a.m. She opens the door, and it's like somebody turned the stereo off. There's nothing. There's no sound. There's nobody there. It was like mid-cry, poof, the audio cuts out. No one in the hallway. And this happened a couple more times. And the crazy thing is, I heard it over the phone. I could hear this woman crying like she was right there. And she went, "Here, I'll prove it to you. Look." And she went and like opened the door with me on the phone. And, I heard it stop, the long distance haunting. So I came out that summer and spent a couple months with her there in this apartment, and started out fine. And then I do think there was, granted, it was not for many reasons a healthy relationship, but throughout the summer, I did feel like the energy in that apartment got worse and worse. And I witnessed the sleep paralysis happen. I'd wake up and see her pinned like to the bed, and I would try to move her, rouse her, shake her, and there was really nothing I could do while it was going on, which was really horrifying. And then I heard the crying in the hallway again, late evening, probably 1 a.m. or so, and went to check it out, opened the door, nothing, nobody there. So anyway, this bad energy and these occurrences continued throughout the summer until one night, I think it was in August, and this would have been at like 3 a.m. We started hearing the crying again, and it was louder than we'd ever heard it. And it did not sound like it was coming from the hallway this time. It sounded like it was inside the apartment. It was so loud that it woke us from sleep. And we realized that it sounded like it was coming from right by the door, but not on the hallway side. And the bathroom was right by the door. You'd walk into the apartment, and directly to your right was the door to the bathroom. So we realized it kind of sounded like it was coming from in there. And we generally thought like someone is in the apartment. Someone must be in the apartment. Regardless of like what we'd experienced, this sounded so nearby that it must be somebody who came into the bathroom and is like, how did this happen? No idea. But then we started hearing this thumping coming from the bathroom as well. And it was a thumping on like the side of the tub. And at first it was just like intermittent. And then it started to get a little more, percussive sort of. And so we're just sitting up straight in bed, staring at each other. And without speaking this entire time, we get up and we both go to the bathroom. And by then the crying, is getting louder and louder as we walk towards it, just as if somebody was in there. And the thumping is getting more and more violent on the sides of the tub. Now, keep in mind, again, nobody lived underneath this bathroom, this apartment. Nobody lived on the other side of the wall. And so we go there and we turn the light on, and we are having like a sense memory of it. Turn the light on, and we could hear the crying as if somebody was in there like 4 or 5 feet away from us. And there is now this violent thumping on the sides of the tub. It's getting more and more frenzied. And I remember my eyes just trained on this bottle of shampoo that was sitting on the side of the tub, and we could see it vibrating with the thumping, vibrating to the point that it fell over, fell into the tub, and the moment it fell, Kay and I booked it, ran out of the apartment, didn't even close the door behind us, ran out and spent the night in the car. And then the next day, started packing. That was it. There's no way in hell that she could still live in that apartment. So started packing things up, and no 2 weeks notice, nothing. That was going to be the last day in the apartment. When the eldest daughter, who'd become friends with Kay, said, what happened? What's going on? Kay said, that place is fucking haunted. It's haunted. And she said, your sister said this, like, did something happen in that place? And she said, yes, actually. This woman was drowned in the bathtub. Pregnant woman was drowned in the bathtub by a jealous, abusive boyfriend. And this was told to her before she told this woman what we saw, what we witnessed. Bathtub wasn't mentioned. Bathroom wasn't mentioned. And we talked to other neighbors in the area that day after hearing about it, and it was corroborated by people that had lived in the neighborhood for a while. So this wasn't some like family ghost story lore. This is like something that people in the neighborhood still had the wounds from knowing this person who lived next door or whatever. And I've tried to look up news stories about it and I haven't been able to figure anything out. For some reason, I cannot find this house. I've gone back to that area to try to find this apartment building, and I cannot seem to locate it. I don't have the exact address anymore, so I've just kind of gone to the general area and looked, and I have not been able to track it down. Because if I could, I'd ask more people in the area questions about it. But yeah, it was horrifying. It really felt like I was witnessing a murder that I could not see or do anything about. And for years, I would not talk to anybody about it because I'd sort of convinced myself it couldn't have possibly happened, or if it did, it didn't happen that way. Regardless of whatever paranormal experiences I had had before, I feel like even the microwave and whatever else I saw growing up or the stories I told my mom, like there's always like first of all, I was a kid, right? So there's this kernel of doubt to my memories of any of those. This, I was adult enough, and it was the only haunting I have ever experienced with somebody. So it was hard for to wrap my head around it being real. And I think my memory sort of convinced myself it was some sort of fabrication because that's easier for my sanity than to like really believe that this happened. So I would tell people about it very sparingly, both because I distrusted myself and because I don't know where people's beliefs about these things lie. And I know it sounds crazy, and I know it sounds like something out of a movie. It sounds almost made up. Especially the twist at the end sounds like something straight out of a film. And in fact, it would have been within the last 5 or 6 years, I finally saw the film The Changeling, 1970s horror film with George C. Scott. And this is essentially the twist in the film is he's in the tub and he hears all these sounds and there's a kid being drowned. I have never ever seen that film until 5 years or so ago. And this was, over 20 years ago that this happened. But I'm aware of that. Like if I'm telling someone the story, they're going to be like, wait a minute, isn't that The Changeling, But, and also I had trouble telling it because I would start to tear up and I'd get short of breath. I mean, even telling you now, when I sort of was visualizing it, my chest sort of froze up a little bit. And then I reconnected with Kay bad breakup, not surprisingly, when it did happen. Didn't talk to each other for a very, very long time, which is wise. It was not healthy. It was not okay, that whole thing. But we did reconnect and, I'm able to put whatever behind me and have empathy or whatever. But I did say, like, can you tell me what you remember about that night without me telling you anything? And let's see if our accounts match up. And she described the exact same thing. Like she even said that she was staring at this shampoo bottle too. Like, so we're both like, our focus was trained in the same places. Like it's just, the way she told it was exactly the way I told it. That was pretty intense to realize like, okay, no matter what I've been trying to trick myself into believing, this did actually happen. But yeah, I mean, I think for years afterwards, I had a bunch of friends who lived out in the Antelope Valley where there's a lot of weird supernatural stuff. When I first moved here, I somehow linked in with this whole group of friends that grew up out there. So we would go there and go to abandoned places and go to supposedly haunted places. And I had like a much more like, I don't know, I was like prodding at supernatural by going to these places. And I still think, looking back, that part of that was like me trying to like mitigate in some way the horror of what I experienced, of like, all right, let's just go to a bunch of crazy supposedly haunted places and like poke around. And eventually I had like one experience with that where I went to this one home that had burned down that supposedly the family had not gotten out in time. The house burned down. And whether or not that's true, I was standing there and I felt like whether they perished in that fire or whether they got out and lost all their belongings, I felt their sadness very strongly being in that space. And at that moment, I sort of said, all right, I'm done. I don't want to have any more paranormal experiences. And for the most part, I haven't. Had some, which maybe we can talk about on another podcast. But I need to get some authorization to share some of those. But for the most part, I haven't. And I certainly haven't had anything as horrifying as that experience. But yeah, I still remember it incredibly vividly. And I still, when I tell it, feel like a sense of sort of helplessness that I wish there was something I could have done, even though what I was experiencing was a reverberation, was this echo of this scar in the timeline, so to speak.
Thank you so much to Alex for sharing his stories. The National Domestic Violence Hotline in the United States is 1-800-799-7233, or you can text BEGIN to 88788. Thank you for listening.